we're live.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Welcome to Art Talks, part of the Department Kunst and Medien here at the ZHdK. Tonight we are joined by Elise Lammer. Elise will be this year's Master Fine Art Diploma curator. That's correct information, right? So we thought it would be a nice opportunity to invite Elise to also give a talk about her curatorial practice and many other practices outside of this position she will take at the ZHdK this semester. Elise trained as an artist at the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, probably a terrible Spanish pronunciation there, did her MA in curatorial studies at Goldsmiths, and is currently involved in the following projects. She's a guest tutor at HED, the ZHdK this semester, and a professor at the Institute of Kunst in Basel under Truus Martinez. She works as an art critic, writing for Spike magazine and Moose magazine, and is also an artist making film work herself. So we are going to format this talk as a sort of loose conversation between myself and Elise. So let's see how that goes. And you're also invited to interrupt and ask questions about specific things at any time if you feel you wish to. Okay, so firstly, we're going to begin with the exhibition space Salts, which you joined in 2014. How was Salts formed and how has it developed through to now?
So it's actually celebrating the 10th anniversary. And I've been working there as a curator for now 5 years. As you mentioned, I started in 2014. I was invited to join by Samuel Leuenberger, who's my co-curator, is also the director and the founder of the space. And so 10 years ago it started. I already knew about SALS probably 8 years ago. But it started 10 years ago as a more like open salon where Samuel was inviting friends and artists he was interested in to just hang works in his living room.
Mm-hmm.
At the time he was running this space or this initiative with who's now his ex-wife. And I think a year later they were joined by the artist Tobias Spistik, whom you might know.
Mm-hmm. He's a former alumni here who studied his master at ZHdK.
So Sam and Toby were good friends, and so Toby was also helping with that. I think then Toby moved on, and Samuel started to run the space by himself. And 5 years in, I mean, things were getting more and more serious. What was initially a living room became more and more a white cube-like living room where, you know, artworks would, I guess, gain more importance and space than television and sofa and so on. So this evolution was taking place. And when he asked me to join, he was already using also these two garage boxes as exhibition spaces. So it was a living room transformed into white cube plus a garden plus garage boxes where no one was allowed anymore to park their cars. And this is when we decided to work together. And I guess since then the main achievements I would say were that SALS became a registered Kunstverein, and also was slowly fully funded or almost fully funded by public and private funding bodies, which I guess was to me very important in order to, I guess, put SALS on the map as a small institution, acquire more credibility as well. So for me as a young aspiring curator in the beginning, I really wanted to work for an institution or a place that I would be proud of, and for me that also goes through funding this space. So I spent a lot of energy trying to organize this together with Samuel.
So this was really your initial role when you came in, was to change it from a kind of more loosely defined space into this variety that's fully funded and is kind of functioning as an institution?
Well, it was not really a mission because it was, totally free. I think
Okay.
Samuel was just happy to let me join and very generous in that sense. But this is what I wanted to do, so I asked him if it was okay to put Saz on that kind of tracks. And so I think it was also a learning experience for both of us because we had to, to approach the city of Basel, the canton, and all the Helvetia, etc.
And so it's not located in the city of Basel, it's just outside.
Yes.
So it's Basel land?
Technically, it's Basel land, yeah.
Okay. And the space seems really interesting to me. It's two garage spaces in this garden space, but
yeah, that's
through history, maybe I'm just remembering incorrect information, but was there something to do with it being a butcher's at some point?
Yeah, it's actually, if and I might be wrong, I don't know the history perfectly well, but Samuel's family, they were all butchers, so they were the main butchers in Biesbaden. It's called Biesbaden, the town where we're located, although it's really right next to Basel. And so there are actually a few elements inside the space that allow the viewer to connect this space to its recent past. Probably, I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago when he was still running as a butcher. Yeah.
Nice.
So here, what you see on the screen is actually the two garages together. At the time, in the beginning, the cars would actually enter on this side. There were like two holes where cars could come in. I mean, it's a small space, but one box for each car, one box, one car. And here we've moved. We've rebuilt this space many times. But here the entrance is actually on the side. That means that when you come in, when you walk through that ramp, you only see this pristine, so to speak, face, which looks a bit mysterious, and you're not disturbed, or your eyes is not distracted by an entrance.
So this exhibition that you currently have up online is the last one that you. We were speaking before, and Elise often collaborates with Samuel creating projects together, but then every so often that sort of author has showed themselves as curator. And this was the last one that you worked sort of alone on.
Yeah, true. We really work as a team of curators, but we are two very different persons. We have very different personalities and tastes, and also we grew a lot since we started working together. So that means SALS is a platform. We run SALS together. We devise the program together, but occasionally we also curate our own personal exhibitions, and it's always a moment to go a bit more experimental. For me, it's always a way to put into practice or into the flesh things I've read or researched, and so that's really my way of working. And Sam has his own way. So this exhibition is indeed the last exhibition I curated alone, which was a whole exploration of the problems or advantages of semantics. I guess since the early Egyptians into atomic waste management, into it's very broad.
So the hieroglyphics of
Yeah,
the Egyptians to the atomic waste.
somehow I could connect these things because I'm very fascinated. There's one episode in history that's always fascinated me, which is how come. I mean, maybe this is too much into detail, but how come having Alexander the Great being pharaoh and king of Egypt for such a long time, leaving people there in Egypt for such a long time, how come we managed to forget how to read the hieroglyphs exactly until we found again the Rosetta Stone.
When was the Rosetta Stone found? It was.
I think it's beginning of last century.
Yeah.
Very late in terms of history. So despite two cultures overlapping for a long time, Western and Eastern in a way, I always wondered how is that even possible. So this, and then I started researching this topic, of people relying so heavily on science and writing. However, the memory through writing is highly unreliable. And then recently, they started digging this I guess inverted tower to bury atomic waste, because so far, in terms of the knowledge we have today, that's the safest way to keep future humans from harming themselves, because it takes about 100,000 years until atomic waste is not directly harmful, right? So the best idea we found is to bury atomic waste very, very deep. And then we just, so we dig a hole with atomic waste, and then we seal the hole.
And this was the same with the Rosetta Stone somehow. It was sealed for
a long
2,000
time.
years.
There is a parallel here, but I think the biggest question is not really how to dig this huge hole, which is in itself a huge achievement. It's how to tell or not tell people that they should never enter this place. And as we know, when you tell someone, especially when you change culture and you tell someone not to do something, they will do it. And with the Egyptians, this is what happened. They said, "Don't do this. You can't disturb our dead kings." But people were interested in the gold that was with dead people, not really in the esoteric or spiritual aspect of it. So it's again it's a collision of two systems of belief. They were very worried not about the gold; they were worried about us or the future humans disturbing sacred order, so to speak. So you have a bunch of scientists and linguists and artists thinking on how to advertise or hide the gate to this inverted tower, which is full of atomic waste. And I thought this was just, philosophically speaking, a wonderful ground to speak about science. And I think science is also what any artist at a given moment is using to communicate something. So very loosely, this exhibition was based on that.
What was the title of the exhibition?
Hunter of Worlds, which I thought had this kind of epic, would give this kind of epic taste to
like the Tomb Raider.
Yeah, to the exhibition, and also seeing artists as hunter of new meanings or providers of new meanings, and in a very, I guess, utopian way, artists as people discovering new grounds. So the work you see here is a work by Nina Canel, the German artist, and I think it's fascinating because it's about this big. So maybe here it's hard to see, it's like this big, really huge. It's full of copper and plastic and metal, and this is underwater internet and communication cable. So it's just a slice of that, and so it's funny how we speak about new technologies as being immaterial. I mean, we know it's not true, but since we can't really touch them, we all have this fantasy. Also, we name the cloud, and it's actually a very big server. So the physicality of this cable is, it's just fascinating to have it here and to see it, and also I'm lucky enough to touch it as well, and it's very heavy. So that was one of the artworks. Here, what you see is a series of post-its, but they made of ceramic paper. So it's porcelain paper. So they're absolutely breakable. However, ceramic is also a material that is known to decay very slowly. And they were engraved. So there was a bit, it was creating a contrast between this idea of, throwing away post-its, which is a fleeing thought most of the time, and the immortality, so to speak, of ceramic. Because this is also the artifact we find every time we dig.
It's the archaeology really.
Exactly.
Okay. To understand how cultures were cooking within
exactly.
forms.
Yeah. And I always in the press release, which was also slightly unconventional, I didn't write about everything we're talking about now. I was just asking the viewer to try to imagine that they're coming to this place maybe in 1,000 years and they encounter all these works. What would they imagine in a new culture, new world? What would they understand of our current culture based on artwork? So it's really artworks as artifacts of a specific time.
And also this idea of a time capsule.
Yeah, totally.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
That's right. We thought maybe we would play this work by Louise Loller. So here you see it installed in this bird box. So that was in the garden at Sals, and that's the first part. And the second part is here, which is, and this part really functions as a script. Louise Loller is a conceptual artist based in New York. And it's a sound work that I was really keen on playing because when you don't pay attention, you hear bird calls. But actually, it's the artist herself who's screaming male artist names while imitating the calls of birds. Again, you have this, I guess, this double take because the neighbors around they thought, oh, suddenly we have so many birds in the garden. How nice is that? Or maybe how annoying. And actually, when you pay attention, you hear the names.
Does it translate in German or French that within colloquial American or English dialect you would say bird as the girl
Yes.
or chick?
Yeah.
And it's kind of this like, oh, that's my chick. Or, and it's quite derogatory. Well, it's not, it's kind of cute, but it's a bit of a kind of...
I think it is related. I like to think it is. Yeah, for sure. And I think the context of this artwork is it's very far away in a way from the thematic of the exhibition, but which is very often the case in the exhibition I put together. There is a very loose theme, and then I try to bring things together without really imposing any meaning. So in this case, she studied in '72 because this is when she was a young artist based in New York, and she was tired of all her male colleagues, whose name you can read here, big names, as you would agree, who were actually occupying all the space and attention, while always asking their female colleagues to help them install the exhibitions, but never mentioning their names. So the name of the female artist was completely overlooked, as it is today, I suppose. So that was a way to fight back with a very, a quite hilarious sound piece. I'll play it. You can find it on the archive of Ubuntu Web if you feel like listening to it, or playing it out loud to your colleagues.
With the space in Sword, is it difficult to give these works to exhibit, or as a now that it's a Rhine in an institution, you have some sort of leeway to negotiate. Because I've originally seen this work, and when I saw it, it was at Dia Beacon, which is like this kind of epic in the just outside of New York, former factory, paper factory. So I guess it's a very kind of important seminal work,
I mean,
which I guess is quite protected in terms of who gets to exhibit it and in what context.
yeah. In terms of conservation, we definitely don't meet the conditions that are required, for example, to exhibit historical painting. So that's not even an option. But for some work of that, I guess of that range, so to speak, it's I guess we play with a bit of good reputation, and that's been really helpful. But it's also not too often that we get seminal works like this one, because it always takes a lot of time to have the conversation with the studio or the archive or the estate or the gallery, and to kind of show and prove your, how serious you are about it. But in this case, I was in touch directly with Louise Lawler, and so she has she has some guidelines, and she asked you to just follow the guidelines, which was to exhibit the list of artists with this red and green color code, to have a good listening, I guess, situation. It was the first time that it was actually played outdoors after Dia, and that was it. And then, yeah, but it depends. It really depends.
Have there been any works that you've really regretted not being able to exhibit? Is that a terrible question?
It's censorship. I can't. No, to be honest, I can't remember.
Yeah.
But also, I don't think we've ever tried to get a work that was clearly outside of our range.
Okay.
Because everything that is, that's sensitive in terms of material, I would not even try, because I would feel too bad to exhibit such work in a damp. It can be damp or too dry environment.
You mentioned before that the press release for this exhibition isn't didactic. It doesn't give everything away behind sort of research and thinking. And this is obviously a sort of curatorial position. So sort of how much information do you give an audience or public? How do you go about sort of working this sort of fine line of too much information and not enough to sort of communicate what the group exhibition is about?
It's a good question. I think a museum and a small Kunstverein, they clearly don't have the same mission. If I were to work in a museum, I think the didactic aspect is extremely important, because you need to contextualize every single work. And I guess the umbrella or the theme of the exhibition becomes absolutely secondary, right? In our case, we have little money to run our operations. However, we have total freedom. So I think this relationship between freedom and finance always sort of evolve, right? And because we allow ourselves to be experimental, for me it's important that I have this full freedom, because that's the only space where I can have it. If I'm hired as a freelance curator by an institution, this is probably not something that would be acceptable, right? But if I can decide, if I'm the queen of my castle, I'd rather not be too didactic, because in the end, I love curating for the results. So while installing, you learn a lot. While researching before that, you learn a lot. And also, once the works are installed, all the relationships that are created when they're sitting next to one another are unforeseeable, right?
Sure.
It's just that the magic really happens when you see, for example, here you have this. It's a pile of graphite. It's 500 kilos of pure graphite, which is the material you find in pencils. but it's also a highly technological material because the next step in the table of elements, I mean, if you compress graphite, I mean, you can't do it yourself, but imagine in a chemical sense, if you compress graphite enough, it becomes diamond. Right? So it's from the cheapest, almost the cheapest material to the most expensive. And it's also the material we've been using to write for such a long time. And this work is made by Marie Matous, who's an artist, French artist based in Basel, who just recently graduated. And here it comes into a weird dialogue with, with Louise Lawler's male artist names that are reflected, but also directly on the window pane. And I mean, these things are very hard to I guess to plan. And that's also what I like. I think it would be great if we could write the press release after the show has closed, right?
Yeah, sure.
So it's a bit in that direction that I'm trying to go.
Great. Do you have any more works within this show?
So these are carpets by Josette Mainu, who's a Catalan artist based in Berlin. And what I was very interested here is that, of course, they carry symbols. So one is the typical smiley face, and the other is a carpet inside a carpet. I mean, it's the drawing of the carpet, which is drawn inside the carpet. So here, I think there's already a rather funny semantic game, but I was more interested in the process because he works with a community of Berber women in Morocco, and since he started a few years back, I think the core aspect of the collaboration has been misunderstanding because he speaks Spanish or English, and they don't understand him. So he makes very quickly drawings trying to explain I want a carpet inside a carpet inside a carpet. And then he gives the drawing to these women and they're like, why don't you do a carpet with my drawing? And so they get into this process of interpretation based on a sketch. And so the result is never quite stable. And this is also what he enjoys in this collaboration. And also, so many times there were some, I guess, mistakes that really slipped into the process of translation. And I thought it was, in terms of an object physically bearing a miscommunication, was interesting in the context of this exhibition.
This apple as well.
So that's another artist, Alan Schmutz, who did this series of bronze apple with the word speed, syndrome, society, and shit. So that's shit. And again, I thought I was just very attracted to these objects. Why would they, they carry some sort of very aggressive words that could be understood as injection, and then it's an apple which is supposed to rot, and yet it's made of bronze because it's a cast of an apple, and then it's just engraved with these words. And here it was interesting, so it's sitting on the second line of the carpet, so it's also two artists creating a communication or establishing a dialogue, because it's not very often that you can literally mix two artworks. Not everybody is keen on doing that. So there was also something that took place during install, and I thought was pretty nice.
Great. So we also wanted to discuss another project of yours, which is Alpena Kids. Did I say right?
Yes.
In how is Swiss German? So what is the Alpena Kids project?
So it's a research platform that I started or initiated in 2015. The image you see here is actually an image of the very first iteration of this project. Back then, we didn't know it would become this ongoing curatorial artistic research platform. I started it with Denis Pernet, who's a curator based in Geneva. And I think we wanted to focus our attention on the relationship between performance and domestic space. And I guess that's why, I mean, there's a loose reference to the space with the house. And back then we were reading a lot of sociology about the meaning of each, or the program of each room of the house. And somehow we felt there was some sort of connection between the house and the use of the body as a medium in contemporary art. Um, so this is at the Schinkel Pavilion.
What is the Schinkel Pavilion? It was up in Berlin.
That's in Berlin, yeah. It's an institution located in West Berlin,
Yeah.
but it's in a region that was heavily bombed.
Okay.
And so most of the historical buildings are being rebuilt, or you have also a lot of modern constructions around. So you have this very beautiful pavilion, really in the middle of an area that is full of new buildings, of fake old buildings. And it's been running as an institution for, I think, if I'm not wrong, 10 years. And of course, I mean, you have really great people, great artists who work there. But what is very important about this space is that somehow you have to work site specifically. There is simply no wall, and nothing is white in this space. We have a very present marble floor. We have this huge ceiling lamp, and of course all the windows. It's just full of light. And that's why we wanted to use this space also as a house. So over the course of one evening, we had 11 performances, and it started early afternoon, and it went late into the night, turning what was suited for kids, very open daylight, turned into a club night. So you also had the audience was evolving throughout the night, as well as the performances. So there was also this idea of going full cycle of a day, from the time you wake up until you go to bed. That was a bit how we wrote the script. Here you can see the Natella is part of it too. So these are the artists we invited for the very first Alpena Kids. And after that, we had a month's exhibition and 2 festivals and reading and a symposium between Geneva at the Bâtiment d'Art Contemporain and Arsenic, that was last winter. It continued there, and then last summer I was at Moto in Berlin, the library, because they organized exhibition outdoors in the courtyard. Until I got this more permanent residency at Theater Arsenic in Lausanne, where I'm sort of guest curator inside the theater, which for me is very interesting because we've been working a lot with art institutions, but always managing to explore the concepts around theatricality, for example, how to manage space. I mean, the timeline during a performance is obviously very different than from an exhibition. I mean, all these questions that maybe are very basic for theater people are not at all obvious for visual artists. So I noticed that there was maybe the next step would be to bring visual artists into a black box, which changes completely their relationship to time and light and space and etc. So I'm very happy that I'm now permanently, so to speak, or at least for 2 years, in this theater, because that involves working in a black box with visual artists who most of the time have never done it before. So just to give you an example, when you have light technicians who says, look, you can have directional light on your sculpture, which is a total no-go in a white cube, because we think it's dated, it's ugly, and all that. Most of the artists are extremely happy. It's like a new way of exhibiting, and everything that is not allowed in a white cube becomes okay because it's a black box, and this just brings very very interesting conversations. So I can show you the.
So has this 2-year residency just started?
Yeah, and actually I was about to show you the first project I did there. So as you can see, the floor is black because it's a dense, a bit softer floor that dancers need in order not to harm themselves. And that was with Julie Monod, who's an artist based in Lausanne, who actually was my student at HED when she was, I think 2 years ago, she graduated. And invited her for the exhibition. And we started actually her exhibition, which was in this black box environment, as you can see, but we started it with an 8-hour long performance where what you see on the screen are actually sculptures, but they are anthropomorphic sculptures. So each sculpture can actually be inhabited by a human body. So we started the exhibition almost with a explanation of these sculptures. So they were all activated over the course of this opening night. And after that, what you could see were these sculptures, anthropomorphic figures, existing only as objects in the exhibition. And I also like this temporality in a sense, because it starts really in what anybody could identify as a theater work, almost very performative. There was smoke and lights, and it was 8 hours, and things were moving all the time. But after that, it was really static, and then really appropriating the codes of an exhibition, an art exhibition. So this negotiating this relationship has been, I think, for the artist invited, something very challenging, but also very interesting, because this is something that I think comes up every time an artist thinks about performance.
I saw one of her works at the Institute of Switzerland with a large rainbow rig. So how are the performances for these? Are they pretty slow in terms of being anthropomorphic, or is there a very choreographed?
No, it's really. I think it's really slow. It's just this idea of filling the costume or the sculpture with human flesh. So it's really the body used as a tool, almost as a very much in the sense of 1960s body performance and body arting. This idea of really inhabiting sculpture, but the thing that the work is about is the form. Or the symbolic load of the form, but not the body. So basically, there were a lot of tableaux vivants, so to speak. People would come out wearing one of the sculptures and just stand still for the vast majority of the performance. I performed because we were performance couldn't come. And so I think it was also a really good experience for myself, because you have to be really locked in this costume, this sculpture for between a half an hour and an hour, which is a very, very long time, because you can hear people around you talking, and suddenly also the relationship between a member of the audience and a performer or sculpture changes, because we're really in between. We always following these codes of these etiquettes, of not touching a sculpture. But here again, I think the audience had to renegotiate this, because the sculptures were moving, and also because it was a black box, suddenly it was more theatrical. So people were actually taking a lot of liberty, right? Touching my head and stuff. And this is something the artist had warned me about, that you have this threshold that suddenly is somehow lost.
Yeah. And that, I doubt, would happen as much within the white hue.
Totally,
Because
yeah.
there's a different code somehow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so all these things that we find out while doing, it's also the reason why we called Alpena, who's a research platform, because we we keep reporting on things that happen when basically you allow visual artists to evolve in a different context with a different timeline.
It really makes me think of happenings, like this idea of like a happening or a single event from the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
And also these temporal scales of like 8 hours. It's like, or the other one before, the 11 performances. There's a real like endurance to a whole night of performance as well. But it takes it into a zone of experimentation. It's what,
Mm-hmm.
like, what are your ideas for the? Are you allowed to talk about the next project?
Yes. I'm working with. Julie Monod and I had worked together in the past because I invited her for the Alpena Kids festival in Geneva last winter, or 2 winters ago now. And now again, opening in April, I'm working with Gilles Furtwängler, who's a Swiss artist as well, whose relationship with performance is probably less obvious than Julie's. In Julie's case, because he's actually a painter. But I guess it's for me also interesting to explore the relationship between painting and performance in that sense. And he's been doing performances where he's reading his own poetry in total darkness. So when he performs, the rest of the work, most of the time, is not visible. So it's like a switch on, switch off between two worlds. And when we started working on this project with Alpena, I said maybe there's a way to reconcile these two things. So that means performing with some light, so people actually can see the performer while the performance takes place, but also his paintings, because the paintings are usually words written or painted. So I guess the, the content of the paintings and the content of the performances are actually very close and complementary. But it's something that he somehow kept separate. So the idea with our next project is to bring these together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. And is there a time frame for that? Do you have a rough date when you're
It's
the scene?
I need to check that. It's in April.
In April.
And just let me open the archive here. It's 27th of March until 7th of April.
Okay,
And the opening is on the 27th at 6 p.m. in Lausanne. Oh, welcome.
Great. And we have one final project that you're part of.
Lebec.
Lebec.
So, but maybe people here have heard of it because it's a residency. It's a new residency, artist residency in La Tour de Paix,
Mm-hmm.
which is a small town between Montreux and Lausanne, I think, on the Lake Geneva flank. So it's really literally by the lake. It's a very beautiful location. And it's a new residency that is, I would say, entirely transdisciplinary. So it's not only for visual artists, it's also for musicians, scientists, and what else? I think that's why. I mean, it's very open to put it this way. And I'm part of the commission of the jury. But when it started, I went to visit this place, and I thought I completely fell in love with this place because the woman who Françoise Siegfried Meyer is the woman who basically was the owner of this beautiful place, and she came from a very rich family of industrials, and she kept this place as the location of where, or maybe as a garden where she would go to maybe ride her horse, go reading, and not really much more. So you have to imagine that this is probably one of the most expensive locations we could think of in Switzerland in terms of real estate. But she never wanted to build anything on this wild field. I mean, it really looks like a wild garden. So she was going there, just sitting, looking at the lake, reading, and being her great self. And she's always been a lover of the arts. So she said, when I pass away, I want my fortune to go into this, but I never want anybody to build a house here. So it can't go into the real estate market. And so she wanted to start this artist residency. So there's a foundation and a residency. And so when I went to visit this place, I completely fell in love. I could totally imagine how she was feeling when going back there to relax and think and be creative. Probably she was a great pianist. And so immediately somehow I connected this to the late Derek Jarman, who's a filmmaker and a writer, who's also known for being an AIDS activist, and whose filmography is very impressive and truly experimental. One thing about Derek Jarman's life is that he, later in his life, after I think he found out that he got AIDS, he bought this very small cottage in Dungeness, which is about 1 hour north of London.
No, it's
south. Sorry, 1 hour south from London, at least by car, on the seaside, and it's a very, very small cottage that is constantly and permanently hit by a very strong mist and wind. So you have parts of the coast, you probably know this better than that are actually protected from the wind. That are, where people love going and also living in these sea towns that are very charming and lovely in a purely British way, But this is not what you find there. Your hair is like always messed up, and you have like sea mist. You can't see anything. So just to find a cottage was hard. We really had to, when we went there last time, we had to fight against the wind.
So we get an image of both Lebec and Prospect Cottage. So you are going to create a garden in homage to Derek Jarman, or have you already done?
Maybe I'll make it. Yeah. So I'm working on recreating a garden, homage to his garden, because he managed to create a garden and to grow even like fig trees in this place that was, really not meant to host a beautiful garden. So in a way, it was lush.
So it's kind of like a wilderness, and in the backdrop there's a nuclear power station.
And that's the other thing, you can see the nuclear power station.
It looks like kind of Kansas in the Wizard of Oz, sort of. It's really not a kind of twee British seaside
welcoming
area.
Cottage.
So he sort of used the garden almost as a therapy as well. Like he was living in central London, and then this was where he kind of removed himself from the urban to this completely desolate place. And his was the first kind of fisherman's cottage to kind of be made into like a nice cottage, and all the rest are kind of really run down during this period. But now he sort of started a trend, and all of them have had some kind of architecture. Mostly it's architects and artists that like live nearby, and it's a nature reserve, so you can't build on top of it. Like it's just these fishermen's huts that are available as a sort of guideline to the property. It can't get any more.
So when Derek Jarman passed away in '94, the cottage was then taken care of by his partner Keith Collins. And very sadly, because I only started this research going more often to London to meet people 6 months ago, Keith Collins just passed away from a brain tumor. So it's been very, that's Lebec. So it's been a very hard research also to conduct, because of the AIDS crisis, some of the most important actors of this project have sadly passed away. Nevertheless, the idea is to create a garden at Lebec that is an homage. So the idea is not to recreate, exactly the same garden, but rather to take this as an excuse to create awareness around Jarman's work, because in Switzerland he's really unknown, and I think his contribution to theater and music is extremely important, but also as an activist for how we say for
he was a like LGBT activist, like huge, and AIDS activist as well, like
so
about being vocal about HIV and AIDS when the media was sort of vilifying it
and scared. He was one of the first public figure to openly say that he had AIDS, and he was fighting prejudice and at the time. So maybe now this seems not so original anymore. But back then it took a lot of courage to do such thing. So with this garden that started growing already, I'm also organizing a sculpture garden, commissioning new works, and in September we will have a festival with screenings and symposium and conferences, and because he did a lot of music videos as well, for example, so he was really involved also with the music world.
For the Pet Shop Boys, for Coil, he did like feature-length films, like one on Caravaggio. Tilda Swinton was in many of his. He's like very famous, I think, in the UK and America, but then outside of that, he's not very well known.
Mm-hmm.
But you probably have seen a music video by him or something. Yeah, sure.
If not,
yeah,
please do.
Yeah. So this is happening in September.
Yeah, this is happening in September. We have a smaller event on the 25th of May. Le Foyer in Process, which is run by Yasmin Afshar, Jura, and a third person. I should know. My apologies. Anyway, so they used to have a project space, but now it became this nomadic project where they go meet people in the process of making an exhibition or a conference or anything that they could be interested in. So they come in while the garden is growing, and before this big festival in September, to just know how the garden is growing and who we've been in touch with. And so we invited some people who were close to German and probably would screen a film, play some music, but it's a smaller event. So we have this 25th of May and probably end of September, the big festival. So, yeah.
Now we should open it up to questions.
Yes, please.
Does anyone have a question? No? Or we can just have a nice conversation. We don't have any privacy, but as we're clearing up, we should. But, thank you so much for coming, and I hope you enjoy working on this year's Master of Fine Art diploma as the curator.
I'm sure I will.
So, thank you.
Thank you.